Yale 360 and Pew Research keep on taking these surveys about climate change, especially in the US, because Americans seem constantly divided on whether climate change is happening, whether human beings are causing it, and what to do about it, etc. And yet, when you take the survey, depending on how the questions are asked, it appears most people are now moving towards accepting that climate change is real, caused by humans, we need to do something about it, and so on. Of course, as we saw in the last podcast, Europeans were always big on believing climate change and climate change action. But now that the bills are coming due, the political and economic costs are beginning to make people, you know, bicker about what should be done and when it should be done and how to pay for it, who pays for it, what to drive, what to eat, and so on and so forth. So this is a Pew Research Center report that just came out in August. This is still August. I'm recording this on 22nd August 2023. This is about what the data says about Americans' views of climate change. Okay, here we are, and you can see activists Activists display prints replicating solar panels during a rally to mark Earth Day at Lafayette Square in Washington. As we know, America is very strongly split into conservative and not so conservative states, because liberal in US versus liberal in Europe can be very different. Nonetheless, California is always leading on climate action. There is the California effect with other states following and so on. Texas and most of the southern states tend to be very conservative even on climate change issues, even though they are moving into renewables because they have the resources like wind and solar. So the first point here, majority of Americans support prioritizing the development of renewable energy sources. So this is a very easy climate action because it can reduce utility bills, create new employment, and so on. 2/3 of US adults say the country should prioritize developing renewable energy sources such as wind and solar over expanding production of oil, coal, and natural gas, according to a survey conducted in June 2023. Of course, there are specific battles with Senator Manchin from West Virginia, which is coal country, and he keeps opposing, well, he seems a bit confused, but nonetheless. 2/3 of Americans prioritize developing alternative energy sources like wind and solar. So here we are looking at age groups and numbers. US should prioritize expanding oil, coal, and natural gas, only 32%. 67% say we should go to renewables. Oppose taking US steps to become carbon neutral by 2050 is only 28, whereas 69% say we should go towards net zero. How to get there is not clear, but they say yes, let's do it. So the technological promises come true, then this will be a good support. But just like in Europe, you ask people, they support actions, but when you say it will cost you in taxes, then they may begin to hesitate. Secondly, Americans are reluctant to phase out fossil fuels altogether, but younger adults are more open to it. So even though there is support for renewables, it is seen as a separate issue when it comes to phasing out fossil fuels. Overall, about 3 in 10 adults say the US should completely phase out oil, coal, and natural gas. More than twice as many say countries should use a mix of energy sources, including fossil fuels and renewables. So you can see the mixture of responses from 1 to 2, right? Younger US adults are more open than older adults to phasing out fossil fuels completely. So here, US adults, 31% want phase out, and 68% say we should use a combination of energies. And at 18 to 29 and 30 to 49, these numbers are higher than the overall adults, but 50 to 64 numbers begin to drop, 65 plus only 20%, and most of them say let's keep the mix of fossil fuels and renewables. It's also party line divided, so Republicans or leaning Republican, which tends to be the conservative party, including far right and moderate conservatives and so on. So 87% say use a mix of fuels and don't phase out fossil fuels, whereas Democrats and leaning Democrats are almost evenly split on fossil fuel phasing out as opposed to using it with renewables. Among Republicans and leaning Republicans, age groups, again, younger ones are more supportive, less than the overall, but still supportive. And among Democrats, leaning Democrats, there is higher than the national average in terms of kids supporting phasing out of fossil fuels. Again, are they really completely aware of the actions that would be needed to take these steps of keeping fossil fuels in the ground or not burning it? They are often, showing up for protests in internal combustion engine, but nonetheless intentions are good. So it's the system that has to provide solutions. If you provide renewable energy and electric vehicles, then they will be happy to take those. But the system itself is in a carbon trap, then they are just telling you we are happy to get out of it if you let us know how to do it. Thirdly, public supports the federal government incentivizing wind and solar energy production. So 2/3 of the US adults say the federal government should encourage production of wind and solar. So here, encourage neither and discourage. So production of wind and solar. There is a small percentage that says discourage, but this is also kind of misleading because there are very many implicit barriers being put up by one of the parties to companies which are trying to go strong on climate action, states wanting to do climate action, so they are making it difficult for corporations and states to take climate action. So this doesn't tell you the whole story. Nonetheless, production of wind and solar, 66% encourage. Electric vehicles has quite a bit of support. Production of nuclear power. This is in terms of federal government providing incentivize for driving these. And oil and gas drilling, again, whether they want it phased out or continue. So you can see that discouraging phasing out is 30% and encouraging is 34%. Coal mining, again, coal will probably go out of business just because the market forces are driving it out, even though exports continue and countries like China and India will burn coal for a long time. And depending on the situation, we saw that even Europeans begin to wonder whether coal should be phased out so quickly when Ukrainian war affects their gas supply, winter heating, utility bills, etc. Fourthly, Americans see room for multiple actors, including corporations and federal government, to do more to address the impacts of climate change. Okay, 2/3 say large businesses and corporations are doing too little to reduce climate change effects. So too little, about the same, or too much. Large businesses and corporations, too little. State elected officials, too little. Ordinary Americans, too little. Who's doing much? Not anybody. Energy industry, not doing much. Local community, you yourself, people admit they are not doing enough. Environmental advocacy organizations don't get a good score either. So federal government, 56% think it's doing too little, and about the rest of them say it's about the right amount or too much. So you have to pay attention to people who think they are doing too much. So they oppose climate action, thinking resources are being taken away towards climate action, or that climate is not changing and we don't need to do anything, or that India and China are creating all the problems, so we shouldn't be doing anything. It'll negatively affect our economy, and so on and so forth. So the logic of why they oppose climate action depends on various misinformations or irrational ignorance, knowing what's happening but saying, well, let's wait and see. Fifth one, Democrats and Republicans have grown further apart over the last decade in their assessments of the threat posed by climate change. So more and more Republicans are going the other way. What drives these? Many reasons. 54% of the Americans view climate change as a major threat, but the partisan divide has grown. So if you go from 2009 to 2023, when the survey was taken. If you look at Democrats, they have gone from 68%. They hit peaks of 83%, and they have dipped a little as well. Economy and other concerns begin to worry them, and extreme events begin to bring them back towards saying, let's do something. So all US adults around 54%, so it's evenly split in terms of Americans seeing climate change as a major threat, but Republicans have remained in the 20s and have taken a little dip as well after COVID. So, it's very easy to see why climate action always takes a back seat when the economy begins to hurt the bottom line and the pocketbooks, right? Climate change is a lower priority for Americans than other national issues. This is not surprising, as Europe also showed. Climate change is a much lower priority for Republicans than Democrats. Each dot here represents one of the 21 issues asked about. So there are many issues considered in terms of priorities. So if you look at US adults, 26% say dealing with coronavirus outbreak, 37% say dealing with climate change, 75% say strengthening the economy. These numbers don't add up to 100 because there are overlaps. Republicans and leaning Republican remain very low on supporting climate action. So 12% say deal with coronavirus, 13% say deal with global climate change compared to 37% with Democrats, and 84% say strengthening the economy is a higher priority. For Democrats, leaning Democrats, 24% say strengthening the military. So among all the 21 issues, something jumps out here. 59% on the other hand say dealing with climate change is should be a priority, and 71% say reducing healthcare costs should be a priority. So you can see how national averages and Republicans versus Democrats split up on what the national issues of prioritization should be. 7 perceptions of local climate impacts vary by Americans' political affiliation and whether they believe that climate change is a serious problem. Democrats more likely than Republicans to see local effects of climate change. So even when something happens like a hurricane dumping 3 meters of rain in Houston, Houston may say that's normal, that happens anyways, but Democrats may say climate change is making it worse. Okay, so US adults who say climate change is affecting their local community a great deal or some, 26% say a great deal, 35% say some. Republican leaning, only 10% would agree it's affecting a great deal, whereas 26% say only some. Democrats, on the other hand, are evenly split in the 40s in terms of a great deal versus some. So it's not all it's not that all Democrats are all about climate change, because they also prioritize things, what federal government should do and what's locally happening and who should pay for it. These are always difficult questions. You can also look at it in terms of Pacific region and all other regions. So Pacific region is generally more of the liberal states, especially in climate action. So Washington, Oregon, California. Who's in the middle? Did I miss somebody? Yeah. So it's a mix in the sense there are social conservatives but climate action liberals. Republican leaning, Democrat leaning. As you can expect, Pacific region has higher percentages for both, but very similar for Republicans. So opposing or saying only some effect from climate change in their region is a higher percentage, much higher percentage for Republicans as opposed to Democrats, which is lower both for Pacific and all other regions. Okay. Finally, about 3/4 of Americans support U.S. participation in international efforts to reduce the effects of climate change. Americans offer broad support, so about 3/4 of the Americans support a U.S. role in global efforts to address climate change. I am putting this here in new findings basically because America for good or bad, plays a big role on global geopolitics, and yet it has never been a full partner in climate negotiations, or Paris Agreement was, I think, still not ratified, even though Obama came and ratified it. So yes, Obama ratified it, but he didn't do much in terms of climate action. Biden passed the recovery bill as a climate action bill, green jobs, green employment kind of thing, but it's struggling in terms of where the money is going and who's taking it and what the real support is in terms of budgets and so on. Nonetheless, about 3/4 of Americans support a U.S. role in global efforts. John Kerry, the special envoy for climate, goes around the world trying to convince especially India and China to lead climate action even as U.S. struggles. So support U.S. participation in international efforts to reduce effects of climate change, 74%. When it comes to efforts to reduce the effects of global climate change compared with other countries with large economies, percentage who say less than others, about as much, and more than others. So country wise, US is doing less than others. US should be doing more than others. So people agree it's not doing as much, but many think it's doing more than others. And similarly, some say US should be doing more, but many think it's doing about as much as other countries, and 27% think it's actually doing more than others. Is this based on any solid information? Not always. They get their information often from politicians and so on, who are, selling their own agenda. As I mentioned, Senator from West Virginia is basically trying to hold on to his seat, and it's coal country, so he will play, he wants some climate action, he seems to support it, and then he wants concessions made for continuing drilling and coal and so on. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but this is true for everybody, including the Europeans. Okay, so let me leave it here.